All right, today we're cracking open a real, historical, cold case. We're talking about the Book of Daniel, a text that has been at the center of some pretty intense debates for centuries. And really, it all boils down to one huge question. Was this book written by a prophet way back in the 6th century BC, or is it actually a much, much later work, maybe from the 2nd century BC? And right there, at the very heart of this puzzle, is this massive 400-year gap. So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the mystery itself. Then we'll dig into three major clues: prophecies, history, and language. After that, we'll get to what might be the real question behind the whole debate. And finally, we'll talk about why this book still matters so much. All right, let's set the scene. Where does this whole 400-year mystery even come from? Well, it all kicks off because there are two totally different stories about the book's origin. Okay, so in one corner, you have the traditional view. The book itself says it was written by this guy named Daniel, an official living way back during the Babylonian exile, around 530 BC. But in the other corner, you've got many modern scholars who argue, nope, this was written anonymously centuries later, more like 165 BC, right in the middle of this really difficult time for the Jewish people. And boom, there it is. That's our 400-year gap. You see, this isn't just some minor academic quibble. This is the very thing that transforms a simple question about authorship into a full-blown historical detective story. Okay, time to dig into our first clue. And let me tell you, this one is a doozy. It all revolves around the book's predictions. Prophecies that seem, well, kind of impossible. So the argument from the critical side is pretty simple. They look at these prophecies and say, whoa, these are way too accurate. The level of detail is just uncanny. They argue that nobody could possibly know the future like that. So the logical conclusion for them? It's not prophecy at all. It's history written after the fact, just disguised to look like a prediction. Let's take a classic example. There's this vision in Daniel chapter 2 of a giant statue, right? It's made of 4 different metals. And the interpretation has often been that these represent 4 world empires, one after the other. If you just read it straight, it looks like Babylon, then Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. And this is where things get really tricky for that late date theory. Think about it. If the book was written in 165 BC, Rome hadn't really become the global superpower it would later be. So how on earth could the author have known to include Rome as the 4th kingdom? It just doesn't quite add up. Well, here's the proposed solution from the late date perspective. They rearrange the sequence. They say the 4 kingdoms are actually Babylon, then Media, then Persia, and finally Greece. See what they did there? It neatly wraps up the prophecy before 165 BC and totally sidesteps that whole messy Rome problem. But here's the thing. In fixing one problem, this theory kind of creates a brand new and maybe even bigger one. Historians are pretty much all in agreement on this. There was no independent Median empire that existed between the fall of Babylon and the rise of Persia. So you end up with a solution that seems to require a historical error. And that's not a great solution, is it? All right, let's pivot to our second clue. This one is all about so-called historical blunders in the text, mistakes that, critics argue, someone actually living back in the 6th century BC just wouldn't have made. Okay, so critics zero in on 3 main things here. First, the book calls Belshazzar king. Second, it calls Nebuchadnezzar his father. And third, it says a guy named Darius the Mede conquered Babylon when all the history books tell us it was Cyrus the Persian. These are pointed to as smoking guns for a later author. But the question is, do these accusations really hold up under cross-examination? Let's take a look at what other historical records have to say, based on the work of scholars who defend the book's accuracy. This is fascinating. For a long time, Belshazzar was a puzzle, but then archaeologists found Babylonian records. And it turns out, while a guy named Nabonidus was the official last king, he spent most of his time away from the capital. And who did he leave in charge? His son, Belshazzar, as co-regent. So calling him king in Babylon makes total sense. And get this, it also explains why Daniel was promoted to be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Why 3rd? Because Nabonidus was number 1 and Belshazzar was number 2. Now, what about the whole father issue? Well, this is more about language than history. We now know that in ancient Semitic languages, the word father could also just mean ancestor, like grandfather or even great-grandfather. Honestly, this point is so widely accepted now that even many scholars who argue for a late date will admit, yeah, that's a pretty weak argument against the book. Okay, on to our third and final clue. This time, we're putting the language itself under the microscope. Can the words, the grammar, the vocabulary, can they tell us when this book was really written? The linguistic argument for a late date basically has two legs to stand on. First, you've got Greek words in the text. The thinking is, that must mean it was written after Alexander the Great came through and spread Greek culture everywhere. Second, the specific type of Aramaic used in the book is supposedly a later form of the language, from a later time period. But when you actually dig into it, it gets interesting. Turns out there are only 3 Greek words in the whole book. And what are they? They're all names for musical instruments. And you know what? We have records that show things like musical instruments were being traded between Greece and Babylon way, way back in the 6th century BC, long before Alexander. And that other point about the Aramaic? Well, more recent linguistic studies have basically flipped that whole argument on its head. Experts like the renowned K.A. Kitchen have looked at everything, the vocab, the sentence structure, and their conclusion is that the Aramaic actually fits better in an earlier time frame, somewhere in the 6th to 4th centuries BC, not the 2nd. Okay, so we've looked at the prophecies, we've looked at the history, we've looked at the language, and after all that, we can finally get to what might be the real fundamental issue at the heart of this whole 400-year-old debate. You see, this debate might not actually be about the evidence itself. It might be about what you believe before you even look at the evidence. It's about your starting point, your basic assumptions, something philosophers call an a priori assumption. And this is where the two sides really diverge. The argument goes like this. If you start from the position that genuine, supernatural, predictive prophecy just can't happen, that it's impossible, then it doesn't matter what the historical or linguistic evidence says. No amount of evidence pointing to an early date will ever be enough, because you've already decided it can't be true. The conclusion is baked in from the very beginning. So let's step back from the debate for a second. Regardless of when it was written, what was this book trying to do? What was its purpose? And why are we still talking about it thousands of years later? If you look at the flow of the book, the stories, the visions, they all seem to be charting this course through history, through the rise and fall of these massive empires. And it all seems to point toward one specific, incredibly difficult moment in time for the Jewish people, a period of brutal persecution under a king named Antiochus Epiphanes, right around 175 BC. And that really gets to the heart of the book's message. Think about the famous stories. Daniel in the lion's den, his friends in the fiery furnace. What are they all about? They're about communicating one incredibly powerful idea, that even when the world feels completely chaotic, even when tyrants seem to have all the power, there is a belief that God is ultimately in control and will, in the end, rescue his people. Which kinda leaves us with one last thing to think about. When it's all said and done, what gives an ancient book like Daniel its lasting power? Is it about getting the exact date right? Or is it about the message of hope that it offered to people who were in the middle of a desperate crisis? Maybe that's the real takeaway.